Les Misérables by Victor Hugo. Part 1, Fantine. Book 1, An Upright Man. Chapter 6, The Guardian of His House. The house, as we have said, consisted of 2 floors with 3 rooms on each and an attic above them. Behind it was a quarter-acre of garden. The 2 women occupied the top floor and the bishop's quarters were below. The first of his 3 rooms, giving directly onto the street, served as the dining room. The second was his bedroom and study, and the third his oratory. One could leave the oratory only by the way of his bedroom, and the only way out of the bedroom was through the dining room. At the far end of the oratory there was a screened alcove with a bed for the occasional guest. The bishop was accustomed to offer it to the country cures, whose personal or parish affairs brought them to Denay. The former hospital dispensary, a small building which had been added to the house, extending into the garden, had been converted into a kitchen and storeroom. The garden also contained a shed, formerly the hospital kitchen, where the bishop kept 2 cows. Half of whatever milk they gave was sent out every morning to the hospital. "I pay my tithe," he said. His bedroom was large and difficult to heat in winter, and since logs were very dear in Denay, he had the notion of sealing off the part of the cowshed with a blank partition. It was here that he passed the very cold evenings. He called it his winter salon. Like the dining room, the winter salon was sparsely furnished, containing only a square whitewood table and 4 straw-seated chairs. The dining room contained, in addition, an old sideboard painted with pink distemper. A similar sideboard, suitably draped with white cloths and imitation lace, served in the oratory as an altar. Wealthy penitents and the devout ladies of Denay had more than once subscribed funds for providing the oratory with a handsome new altar. The bishop took the money and gave it to the poor. "The soul of an unfortunate who thanks God for consolation," he said, "is the best of altars." There were 2 wicker prayer stools in the oratory, and an armchair in the bedroom, also of wicker. When the bishop received half a dozen or more persons at a time, the prefect, officers from the garrison, or students from the little seminary, chairs had to be fetched from the winter salon, and, if necessary, the armchair from the bedroom and the prayer stools from the oratory. In this way, seating for 11 visitors could be provided. Sometimes there were 12, and on these occasions the bishop solved the problem by standing in front of the fire in winter, or in summer proposing that they should walk in the garden. There was a chair in the screened alcove, but it had lost part of its straw seat and one of its legs, so that it had to be propped against the wall. Mademoiselle Baptistine had in her bedroom a capacious wooden easy-chair which had once been gilt and upholstered in flowered silk. But since this had to be brought in through the window, on account of the narrowness of the stairs, it could not be used for general purposes. It had long been Mademoiselle Baptistine's ambition to acquire a drawing-room armchair with tapered mahogany legs and yellow velvet upholstery with rosettes. But this would have cost at least 500 francs, and in 5 years she had only been able to save 42 francs 10 sous. So in the end she had finally given up the idea. Do we ever realize our fondest dreams? Nothing could have been more simple than the bishop's bedroom. A French window opposite the bed, giving on to the garden, a narrow iron bedstead with a canopy of green serge, and beyond it, behind a curtain, an array of toilet articles, betraying the fastidious habits of the one-time man of fashion. 2 doors, one by the fireplace leading to the oratory, and the other by the bookcase leading to the dining room. The shelves of the big glass-fonted bookcase were filled. The fireplace, its wooden surround painted to resemble marble, was normally without a fire. It contained instead 2 ornamental fire-dogs, a form of episcopal luxury, embellished with flower vases and foliations that had once been silver gilt. And above the mantelpiece, where ordinarily a mirror is placed, there hung a once silvered copper crucifix against a square of threadbare black velvet in a wooden frame that had lost its gilding. By the French window was a large table with an inkstand and a confusion of papers and thick tomes, and besides the table was the wicker armchair. A prayer stool stood at the foot of the bed, borrowed from the oratory. 2 portraits in oval frames hung on the walls of either side of the bed. Small gilt inscriptions on the bare canvas surrounding the portraits indicated that they represented respectively the Abbé de Chaloux, Bishop of Saint-Claude, and the Abbé Tortu, Vicar General of Agde and Abbot of Grand Champ, of the Cistercian order. The bishop had inherited these when he took over the room from the hospital patients, and had left them where they were. They were priests and presumably benefactors, two things entitling them to his regard. Otherwise, all he knew about them was that they had received their appointments on the same day in April 1785, the one to his bishopric and the other to his living. He had made the discovery when Madame Magloire had taken down the portraits to dust them, the details being inscribed in faded ink on a small square of paper, yellowed with time and attached with sealing wafers to the back of the portraits of the Abbé de Grandchamp. The French window was covered by an aged curtain of some coarse material which had finally become so worn that Madame Magloire had been obliged to put a large patch in it to save the cost of buying a new one. The patch was in the form of a cross, a fact upon which the bishop often remarked with pleasure. All the rooms in the house, those on the ground floor as well as the upstairs rooms, were whitewashed like a barracks or a hospital. However, during the later years, as we shall presently see, Madame Magloire discovered wall paintings under the dismembered paper in Mademoiselle Baptistine's room. This was accounted for by the fact that before becoming a hospital, the house had been a place of assembly. The bedrooms had red-tiled floors, scrubbed every week, with straw mats beside the beds. For the rest, the house was maintained by the two women in a state of scrupulous cleanliness. This was the one luxury the bishop allowed. "It is taking nothing from the poor," he said. But we may confess that of his former possessions he still retained a set of 6 silver knives and forks and a large silver soup ladle, which rejoiced the heart of Madame Magloire when they lay splendidly gleaming on the white tablecloth. And since we are depicting the Bishop of Denay as he was, we must add that he more than once remarked, "I should find it hard to give up eating with silver." To this measure must be added 2 massive silver candlesticks, which he had inherited from a great aunt. They had wax candles and stood as a rule on the bishop's mantelpiece. But when there was a guest, Madame Magloire lit the candles and placed them on the dining table. In the bishop's room, at the head of the bed, was a small cupboard in which she locked the silver cutlery and ladle every night. But it must be added that the key was never removed. The garden, somewhat the worse for the rather ugly buildings we have mentioned, was laid out in 4 intersecting paths around the drainage trap, and a 5th path ran around it, flanking the white boundary wall. The path enclosed 4 square plots bordered with box. Madame Magloire grew vegetables in 3 of these, and the bishop had planted flowers in the 4th. There were a few fruit trees. Madame Magloire once said teasingly to him, "Monseigneur, you believe that in making use of everything but this 4th plot is wasted. Salads are more useful than flowers." "You are wrong," replied the bishop. "The beautiful is as useful as the useful." Then after a pause he added, "More so, perhaps." The 4th plot, divided into 3 or 4 beds, occupied nearly as much as the bishop's time as he did his books. He would spend an hour or 2 there whenever he could, weeding, hoeing, and planting. He was not as hard on insect pests as a good gardener would have liked him to be. But then he claimed no knowledge of botany, knew nothing of strains and genera, and took no sides in the disputes between learned botanists. He did not study plants. He merely loved flowers. He had great respect for men of learning, but even more respect for the ignorant, and without forfeiting either loyalty he watered his beds every summer evening with a green watering can. No door in the house could be locked. The dining-room door, which gave directly on to the cathedral close, had originally been as heavily equipped with locks and bolts as the door of a prison, but the bishop had all these removed, so that by day or night the door was only latched, and anyone could enter at any time. This had at first caused the 2 women great concern. "Put bolts on your bedroom doors if you like," he said to them. They came in the end to share his simple faith, or at least to behave as though they did, although Madame Magloire had moments of misgiving. As for the bishop, his view of the matter is conveyed by the 3 lines which he wrote in the margin of a Bible. This is the distinction. The doctor's door must never be shut. The priest's door must always be open. There is another note which he wrote in the margin of a work entitled A Philosophy of Medical Science. "Am I not as much a doctor as they? I too have my patients, in the first place theirs, whom they call sick, and then my own, who I call unfortunate." And he wrote elsewhere, "Do not ask the name of the person who seeks a bed for the night. He who is reluctant to give his name is the one who most needs the shelter." It happened one day that an estimable curé, I do not recall whether he was the curé of Colombrou or of Pompeyri, having probably been promoted by Madame Magloire, asked Monseigneur whether it was not perhaps a little injudicious on his part to leave his door unlocked at all hours, and in short, did he not fear lest some calamity might befall a house so unprotected? The bishop touched him gently on the shoulder and said, quoting the Psalms, "Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain." Then he changed the subject. It pleased him to say, "There's a priest's courage just as there is the courage of a colonel of dragoons. But," he added, "ours must be quiet." Section 7. Cravat. Here an event falls naturally into place which cannot be omitted because of the especial light it throws on the character of the Bishop of Denay. After the breaking up of the robber band of Gaspard Besse, which had infested the gorges of Ulliot, one of Besse's lieutenants, Cravat, escaped to the mountains. He hid for a time in the country of Nice with the few surviving members of the band, then moved to Piedmont, and suddenly reappeared in France. In the region of Barcelonnette, he and his companions were seen first in Jauvert, and then in Tuiles. He hid in the caves of the Joug de l'Aiguille, and from there preyed upon hamlets and villages, moving down through the ravines of Ubaye and Ubayette. He even ventured as far as Embrun, where he broke into the cathedral one night and looted the sacristy. His maraudings alarmed the countryside. The gendarmerie pursued him, but he always escaped, sometimes by the use of force. He was an intrepid rogue. It was during this reign of terror that the bishop arrived in the district on a tour of the diocese. He was met at Chastelar by the mayor, who urged him to turn back. Cravat was in control of the hills as far as La Arche and beyond. To go further would be dangerous, even with an escort, and it would mean risking the lives of 3 or 4 unfortunate gendarmes. "Just so," said the bishop. "I intend to go without an escort." "Monseigneur," cried the mayor, "you must not even think of it. I think so much of it that I refuse absolutely to have any gendarmes, and I shall be leaving in an hour." "Alone?" "Yes, alone." "Monseigneur, you cannot." "There is a humble commune in the mountains which I have not visited for 3 years," said the bishop. "The people are friends of mine, peaceable and honest shepherds, who own no more than 1 in 30 of the goats they pasture. They spin brightly colored woolen threads and play mountain airs on 6-hole pipes. They need someone to talk to them from time to time about God. What would they think of a bishop who was afraid? What would they think of me if I did not go?" "But the brigands, Monseigneur, if you should fall foul of them—" "Just so," said the bishop. "Since you mention it, I may meet the brigands. They, too, may be in need of someone to speak to them of God. But they are like a pack of wolves, and perhaps that is why Jesus has anointed me to be their shepherd. Who can account for the ways of providence? They'll rob you. I own nothing. They may kill you. An old priest mumbling his incantations? Why should they? Merciful heaven, Monseigneur, if you should meet them, I shall ask them for alms for my poor. Monseigneur, I beseech you not to go. You'll be risking your life." "Is that really all, Monsieur le Maire?" said the bishop. "I was not put into this world to preserve any life, but to protect souls." There was nothing for it but to let him go. The tales of his absence spread throughout the countryside, causing great alarm. He left, accompanied only by a small boy who volunteered to act as his guide, having refused to let his sister and Madame Magloire to go with him. They went on mules, meeting no one, and the bishop arrived safely at the hamlet of his friends and shepherds. He stayed there a fortnight, preaching, ministering, teaching, and moralizing. Before leaving, he wished to have a ceremonial Te Deum sung. But when he discussed this with the curé, he encountered a difficulty. There was no suitable church apparel. All the village could offer was its shabby sacristy and a few chasubles trimmed with false braid. "No matter," said the bishop. "Announce the Te Deum after the sermon. Something will turn up." Messengers were sent to the neighboring churches, but the sum of all the treasures of those humble parishes was not enough to clothe a single cathedral cantor in a fitting manner. And in this awkward situation a large chest arrived for the bishop, brought to the presbytery by 2 unknown horsemen who at once rode away. It was found to contain a cope of cloth of gold, a mitre ornamented with diamonds, an archbishop's cross, a magnificent crozier, and the rest of the pontifical raiment stolen a month previously from the cathedral at Embrun. There was also a sheet of paper bearing the words, "Cravat to Monseigneur Bienvenu." "I said something would turn up," commented the bishop, and he added, smiling, "To him who is content with a cure's surplice, God sends an archbishop's cope." "God, Monseigneur," murmured the cure with a faint smile. "Or the devil?" The bishop looked sternly at him and answered, "God." When he returned to Chastelar, people lined the roadside to see him. Mademoiselle Baptistine and Madame Magloire were awaiting him at the presbytery, and he said to his sister, "Was I not right? The poor priest went empty-handed to the poor people of the hills and comes back with his hands full. I set out with nothing but my trust in God, and I have brought back the riches of a cathedral." And before they went to bed that night he said, "We must never fear robbers or murderers. They are dangers from outside, small dangers. It is ourselves we have to fear. Prejudice is the real robber, and vice the real murderer. Why should we be troubled by a threat to our person or our pocket? What we have to beware of is the threat to our souls." He added, turning to his sister, "A priest must never speak to protect himself against other men. Men do as God allows them to do. We may only pray to him when we feel ourselves to be in danger. And we may pray, not for ourselves, but for our brother, lest through us he fall into sin." However, episodes such as this occurred only rarely. We report those of which we have knowledge, but in general, he spent his life doing the same things at the same time, and a month of his year resembled an hour of his day. As to what became of the riches of Embrun Cathedral, it is a matter on which we prefer not to be questioned. They were very handsome objects, very tempting, very suitable for stealing for good of the poor. Besides, they had already been stolen. Half of the business had been done, and it only remained to alter the course of the theft, just to redirect it a little way. We will not comment ourselves on the matter. But later, a somewhat cryptic note was found among the bishop's papers which may have had some bearing on it. It ran, "The problem is to decide whether this should be returned to the cathedral or to the hospital."